Okay, thank you. Well, just to say that prophylactic amulets against the plague have been used since at least the 8th century BC. So this black stone tablet has got a loop containing the remains of a copper pin that should be used to suspend the object from a garment. And the surface of the specimen is covered in cuneiform script, recording a quotation from an Akkadian poem called the Epic of Error. Error was a Neo-Assyrian god of mayhem and pestilence, and parts of the text were appropriated as prophylactics against exorcism and plague. So there's a long lineage of amulets against plague, but I'm going to be concentrating on the early modern period. Western Europe suffered a variety of plagues in the modern period. Waves of disease swept through towns and countryside again and again. Bubonic, septicaemic, and pneumonic varieties of the plague accounted for the deaths of between 30 and 60% of the population of major urban centres such as Venice, Genoa, Milan, Padua, London, Marseille, and Moscow throughout the 14th to the 18th centuries. In Christian Europe, the appearance of plague was variously attributed colloquially to heresy, to atheism, swearing, drunkenness, and even changes in fashionable clothing. But for the more serious medical and natural philosopher, the potential causes of plague came down to four main candidates. The first was the wrath of God. The second, medical astrology, relying on the interconnectedness between the macrocosm and the microcosm. Thirdly, de Fracastorio's theory of seeds of disease. And finally, the idea of miasmas, or bad air. Well, the contemporary state of medical knowledge and therapeutics meant that there was very little effective cure for the plague and very little hope of ameliorating the symptoms. The use of amulets was one approach used by a desperate population to find some means of protection against the disease. And one early modern writer even framed his preferred approach to the prospect that God visited the plague on the population in amuletic terms, writing, "Hearty prayer availeth much, and is the most effectual cordial, the best preservative, the most excellent restorative, and the most sovereign antidote, the most powerful amulet." Well, a variety of medicinal amulets were worn in order to strengthen or corroborate the body in times of infection, to maintain the strength of the heart, or to afford general protection. This talk will consider only those amulets specifically indicated for use in the plague. Well, some are mentioned only briefly in early modern texts and often include materials to which anti-poisoning virtues were commonly ascribed. Indeed, these materials were often incorporated as therapeutic simples in more complex medicinal remedies against the plague and other conditions believed to be caused by poisons entering the body. Stephen Bradwell, for example, lists unicorn horn. That's narwhal horn in this case. You can see the amulet, an amuletic jewel from the V&A in the middle at the top. Also, he listed bezoar stone, as you can see top right, an intestinal stone from goats and other animals, and smaragdus, which is an older name for emerald, as being used amuletically against plague, with the caveat that he's got no confidence in their effectiveness. Amulets may be of two sorts, Bradwell writes: simple and compounded, simple such as unicorn's horn, bezoar stones, hyacinth, smaragdus, and such like, but I would wish none to put any confidence in such disputable things. Well, we heard yesterday how serpentinite could be used as an amulet against plague, and I remind you that Thomas Nichols in his lapidary said if it be worn, it'll secure the person wearing it from stingings of serpents, from frenzies, lethargies, and from plagues, poxes, and poisonings, and the like. Well, Robert Lovell in 1661 adds amber and hyacinth or jacinth, which is red zircon, to the list of amuletic materials used in time of plague, but without any further explanation. Abracadabra is a word of disputed origin. It first appears in a didactic medical poem entitled Liber Medicinalis by Severinus Sammonicus, a tutor to the 2nd century Roman Emperor Caracalla. Severinus recommended that the word be worn in triangular form, as here on the left in this 13th century manuscript of Sammonicus' work, as an amulet against, in this case, malaria. Clearly, its use had expanded by the 17th century, though, to include prophylaxis against the plague. Although it's a work of fiction, Daniel Defoe's Journal of a Plague Year was first published in 1722, heavily reliant on the personalities and practices of the Great Plague in London in 1665 to 1666. Defoe refers to the use of abracadabra amulets and the word itself being posted prophylactically on the doors of houses, but is rather caustic in his assessment of their worth. I might spend a great deal of time in my exclamations against the follies and indeed the wickedness of those things in a time of such danger, he says, in a matter of such consequence as this of a national infection. How the poor people found insufficiency of those things, and how many of them were afterwards carried away in the dead carts and thrown into the common graves of every parish with these hellish charms and trumpery hanging about their necks. Trumpery, there's a word that might bring new meaning in current day political atmosphere. While rather more popular and certainly more common in written accounts was the use of various poisonous materials as protective amulets against the plague, and these include the use of arsenic, liquid mercury or quicksilver, dried toads, and live spiders enclosed in walnut shells. The Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe was convinced that keeping spiders shut up in walnut shells was an effective treatment for all manner of fevers. And in a letter to his one-time tutor, Anders Wedel, Brahe explained that the walnut with the spider worn around the neck was kept there until the spider died. At that point, a cure was expected to be effected. He called it a magnetic remedy. The poisonous spider attracted any poison to itself by sympathy, diverting the poison, therefore, away from the patient. And this approach had been used since the time of Galen to provide protection against agues or malaria. Sir Kenelm Digby on the right explained that the spider drew to itself contagious airs that would otherwise infect the bearer. Well, arsenic was the common component of antipestilential amulets. Often utilized as a geological medicinal simple, it was available in several forms: native arsenic, the yellow sulfide orpiment or aura pigmentum, and the red sulfide real jar. Several early modern authors refer to a recipe for an amulet ascribed to Pope Adrian VI. And the recipe is: take arsenic 2 ounces, aura pigmentum 1 ounce, make little tablets thereof with the whites of egg and drum catacanth, and hang them about the neck against the heart. Philalethes in 1722 recommends the use of white arsenic in 2 recipes for plague amulets. White arsenic is arsenic trioxide and was obtained by heating the arsenic minerals until you had a white residue. In the first amulet, he combines it with real jar, and in the second with a variety of precious stones and orpiment, and the resulting tablets were sewn into silk bags and hung about the neck. Kemp in 1665 explains that some physicians esteemed quicksilver as the best amulet against the plague. He also gives an account of the supposed origins of its use. He indicates that Italian women used to wear quicksilver enclosed either in a nut or a quill, dangling between their breasts in order to prevent drying up of their milk. But during times of plague, it seems that these women survived preferentially as an additional benefit of the amulet. But if the force of the plague was sufficient to overcome the protective power of the quicksilver, it was said that the nut or the quill broke and the liquid mercury spilled out. And he gave detailed instructions, as you can see here, as to how to make the amulet itself. Well, the use of toads as amuletic protection against plague has been studied in detail by others elsewhere. So just suffice it to say here that it too was believed to work either by the power of sympathy, drawing the poison to itself from the prospective patient, or by blocking the miasmas which caused the disease. And there were 2 interesting and powerful supporters of the use of toads in this way. One was Robert Boyle, who repeated the observations of others that toad troche were effectively used as prophylactics. He says, I shall add a memorable thing communicated to the experienced Welfer. He wrote an enormous 25-volume dictionary of materia medica by this chief physician of the states of Moravia. This learned man, whom he extols for a great physician, assures him that having prepared some troche of toads according to Helmont's way, He not only found that being worn as amulets, they preserved him and all his domestics and friends from the plague, but that having caused these troches to be put upon the plague sores of several persons, none of them died. But the venom of the pestilential carbuncles was weakened so that the ulcers were afterwards easily cured by normal means. And then there was Sir Isaac Newton. He wrote about the efficacy of wearing toad-based lozenges in a recently auctioned letter, I beg your pardon. A toad suspended by the legs in a chimney for 3 days, which at last vomited up earth with various insects in it onto a dish of yellow wax and shortly after died, combining the powdered toad with excretions and serum made into lozenges and worn about the affected area, drove away the contagion, he says, and drew out the poison. Well, probably the most complex amulets, involving many of the materials mentioned earlier, are the Zenexton, ascribed to the rather iconoclastic itinerant 16th century physician Paracelsus. The details of these amulets are furnished in the writings of one of his disciples, Oswald Kroll. Kroll indicates that Zenexton required 18 dried toads, the first menstrual blood of young maidens, white arsenic, orpiment, dittany, roots, pearls, coral, and oriental emeralds. The small cakes made from these ingredients were encased in metallic instruments, as he named them, which were then hung from the neck. There were 2 varieties recommended, depending on the wealth of the patient. The best quality was made of gold and ornamented with precious stones, and the lesser quality one was made of steel. Well, Paracelsus invoked the supposed interactions between the macrocosm and the microcosm to account for plague. He suggested that the evil intentions and activities of mankind so poisoned the heavens that the heavens' response was to reflect that poison back onto mankind by star-mediated infection. Well, clearly, protection and cure against maladies caused by personally directed, astrally mediated power from the heavens requires a specialized means of intervention. So these Zenectons also harnessed astrological power. Kroll indicated that a serpent and a scorpion were to be engraved at astrologically auspicious times, and he advises stopping the nostrils when pulverizing the toads and adding musk or amber to the mixture to help diminish the offensive smell. Hanging the Zenexton from the neck by means of a silk cord so that it lay over the heart ensured that it not only preserves from pestilence, he wrote, but hinders whereby the body is less affected with venoms or astral diseases. And he explains that the cakes attract the poison from within and then consumes it. Well, there was considerable debate concerning such plague amulets during the 17th century. Francis Herring put forward the case of the Royal College of Surgeons in 1603, and that stated that rather being an effective prophylactic against the plague, materials such as arsenic were actually dangerous. And the argument ran like this. Arsenic is known to be a poison, and when warmed by the body, it emits toxic fumes which penetrate the body itself. If the patient doesn't suffer from plague at the time, the fumes have nothing to wrestle with, and so they turn against the body and causing it harm and perhaps even death. He appealed to various authorities in support of his arguments, concluding that the wearing of amulets was just a Judas kiss and a Job-like embrace. Well, this drew an impassioned response from the Elizabethan Paracelsian physician and member of Parliament, Peter Turner. His counter-argument ran like this. Well, arsenic is indeed a poison, but that doesn't mean to say that it's not useful medicinally. Indeed, it's used to treat all sorts of things, as listed here, wens, respiratory problems, and so on. And such poisons are taken therapeutically since they're effective and they're commonly used in medicine. And so if you do that carefully and under proper direction, there shouldn't be a problem. And if you also wear the bag containing this poison carefully, making sure that it's in nice thick cloth and so on, then you wouldn't suffer any side effects. Well, this brought a counter argument from Herring, who just basically repeated what he'd said before, but slightly stronger language. So you can see that this was a matter of considerable debate in the early 17th century. But I'd like to finish with just a little information on a different sort of plague amulet, which was especially popular in the Austro-Bavarian region during the 17th century, but dating from the 16th right the way through to the 19th centuries. These are plague sheets or pestblätter and consist of small printed sheets of paper sometimes hand-coloured, drawing on what's usually Counter-Reformation Catholic religious imagery with accompanying text. The text is sometimes written out in full, perhaps giving an indication as to the use to which the amulet was to be put, but sometimes it's in the form of isolated letters or characteres, and these inscriptions included medieval liturgical formulas which were abbreviated such that only the first letter of each word is given, often separated from each other by Latin crosses. So if we look at a few examples, these involve the use of traditional Christian icons. And the first example here, the cross is depicted in a form commonly seen in the region. The upright vertical beam or stipes has two cross pieces or patibulae, and the upper of which is the shorter of the two. And then we've got roundels at the junction of the cross beams and the stipes, and they depict in the upper one, you can see the crucifixion, and in the second one, the lower one, the Trinity together with Mary and Joseph. And notice the abbreviated incantations that form the inscription. In addition to protecting against the plague, this example was also used to combat witchcraft. This second example symbolically displays the wounds of Christ, while the third shows Mary with the baby Jesus and conveniently indicates that this is contrapestum, outlined in red there. Well, these examples employ the iconography of saints. In the two examples on the left, St. Sebastian and St. Roch are standing either side of the cross, while St. John Nepomuc is lying in a cave at the base of Golgotha. Sebastian and Roch are both plague saints, while John Nepomuc is credited with intercession for healing. The acrostic on the crossbars of the left-hand cross are a representation of what's known as the Zacharias blessing, a formulation which was approved for use by the Council of Trent in 1545 to 1563. It was part of the Counter-Reformation movement. One of the letters, the first D, represents the phrase, "God, my God, drive the plague out of this place and free me." At the bottom right is a line graving of the head of St. Anastasius, whose decapitated head was transported to Rome, where it drove out the devil. In fact, that decapitated head means to say that St. Anastasius is the patron saint of headaches. Both it and the folded paper that you can see above, both from the Welcome collection, are marked contrapestum, again indicating against the plague. So we've got a brief overview of amulets used in early modern times to protect against plague, and they include a variety of precious and semi-precious stones believed to possess intrinsic protective virtues, poisonous objects which were believed either to draw poisons to themselves by the power of sympathy or to extract poisons from miasmas before they reach the patient, and protective religious imagery, all commandeered in order to be able to fight the plague. Thank you.